Hi, I'm Paul, welcome to Skip the Rules, the show that gets you around the rulebook and gaming faster. Now today we're going to be looking at our first board game that's played on an actual board. Zombietown pits you against the hordes of the undead, armed with only a pistol, a few planks of wood, and some cranky neighbours. The aim is simply to survive this attack by the living impaired by building barricades, hoarding supplies, and avoiding the old lady down the street who keeps insisting you don't look too well. Let's skip the rules. Anyone who's ever seen any zombie movie will probably at some point have come up with their own survival plan should they come knocking. Things rarely go the way we would like though, and you may be left with only the contents of your loft with which to build an impenetrable fortress. Let's see what your attic holds. We don't need this. Now the board for Zombietown represents the neighbourhood in which you and your companions are trapped. Curiously lacking any roads in or out, we're either led to believe this is an island or a land where the helicopter rules. The zombie horde. For some reason the player counters in this game seem to favour high-vis jackets rather than any kind of camo. The difference between survival and brain cravings. We've got the action cards and the house cards. Our unwilling protagonists for this game, the character cards. Now, no zombie movie would be complete without a bit of gratuitous violence, so we have combat cards. And finally, we've got the barricades, minus wooden planks, and our day counter. It's time to see whether a few ripped up floorboards and some Christmas tree lights can be cobbled into a defence. With hordes of the undead wandering around, you need to ask yourself only one question. Who are you going to call? With me today I have my fellow zombie busters, Josh and John. Now the first thing you need to do is unfold the board in the middle of your gaming area. But you need to make sure that everybody can reach this because you're all going to need to be able to get to all sections of the board. The next thing is to take your zombie horde and upend it in the middle. The middle being the graveyard. Clearly, dignified burials were not high on the list for this town. Possibly why they're in their current predicament. Once that's done, the zombies need to be set up so that they're in each of the squares surrounding the graveyard. This forms the first wave of the undead that are going to be attacking you. After that's done, each player needs to decide the coloured pawn that they're going to use for that game to represent their character. They also are going to need to take the coloured tokens that match the colour of the pawn they've just chosen.
Next, separate out your player cards. Give these a shuffle and each player is dealt one, which when they receive it, they need to turn it face up with the number 4 away from themselves. That's to indicate they've got 4 points of health left. And in true US fashion, each player starts out armed. So from the action cards, take out 3 or more, depending on how many players you've got, 3 bullet guns. Each player gets one of these as well, and they start off with the 3 away from themselves to note that they've got 3 bullets left.
Once you know which of these highly elite characters that you're going to be playing, the next job is to choose your home base. This is simply a starting point, and at this point, since the houses are all the same, the choice you make is fairly arbitrary. The next job is to shuffle the house cards. These then get randomly distributed to each of the houses. These are simply a speciality of the homeowner that lived there and can range from anywhere between a gun collector who's got piles of ammo to a woodworker who's a bit handy and able to build a barricade in an emergency. Each of these has a special rule, but we'll look at these later. You also need to start organising your action cards. Once you know where you live, you now need to start thinking about the loot you've got that you can use to survive. The action card deck gets shuffled, then each player gets given 6 cards. You've got to go through these cards and pick the 3 cards that you want to keep that's going to form your starting hand. The other 3 get discarded. Now, the items fall into 2 categories. The first one is the event cards, and these have got some text on the bottom. The other one is the non-event cards, but we call these items. Now, event cards can't go into your starting hand, so these need to be discarded automatically. You must then choose between the remaining item cards so that you end up with only 3 left in your starting hand.
You may find yourself in a position at the start of the game of not having enough item cards in your hand to fill the 3-card hand. In this case, you put aside the item cards you do have, discard the remaining hand consisting of event cards, and then draw from the action card deck enough cards to fill the hand. If you happen to draw another event, discard that one and draw again until your hand consists of 3 items.
Once everybody's chosen their starting hand, the remaining action cards are then shuffled, and 9 cards then dealt out to each of the remaining houses. No more cards get dealt out to the player houses unless you're playing a 5 or 6 player game, in which case an additional 3 cards are played to each of the player home bases. In this case, however, we don't need to do that. Finally, you must determine who gets to go first. This is simply a case of rolling a dice and seeing who gets highest. The person who gets highest will also become the keeper of the time. This means that they'll be responsible for keeping track of what turn it is, as this dictates the rate at which the zombies attack. Although Zombietown is a survival game, don't be fooled into thinking that it's cooperative. The aim of the game is not only to live through this invasion, but also to collect together the most resources. These get translated into points at the end. This means that while everybody's trying to survive, each of the other players is as likely to shoot you as to let you wander merrily by. Now there's a few things you can do each turn. The first of these is known as the free movement. After that you can take 3 additional separate actions. The free movement simply allows a player to move their pawn 3 squares in any direction, including diagonally. You can move your player into or out of another house from any direction. The free movement can be done before or after the 3 actions, but not in between. You can also not interrupt a free movement to take an action with the intention of carrying that movement on later. The movement ends there. Handily, the houses are separated by 2 squares, so that means you can make a mad dash for safety of another house using only this free movement. It's also worth pointing out that while the houses appear to span 2 squares, they're only counted as 1, so it can be used as a nice shortcut. There are a few restrictions on movement, but it's useful to know a few of the other rules of the game before we go into those, so we'll take a look at them later.
Once you've played your movement, there are a number of different actions you can choose from to take up the second half of your turn. The first of which is to play an item card from your hand. Now we have a range of item cards to choose from. The first one we're going to look at is the Survivor. This represents a whimpering civilian that you found on your travels. You can play this in one of 2 ways. Firstly, you can play him with your character card, and he's then thought of as joining your party and is treated as moving alongside you at all times. Or, what I'm going to do is play the Survivor in the house I'm currently occupying. As that house is unclaimed, the Survivor can claim it for me, represented by this handy dandy little token, and the Survivor is then thought of as defending the house should I choose to make like a tree and get out of there. Next up we have guns. Now I can use a gun card from my hand to arm the Survivor I've just placed in that building. That means he can defend himself or the building should I choose to go walkabout. I do that by simply placing the gun card next to the Survivor card. Alternatively, I can arm myself with the gun by placing the gun next to my character card or any other gun cards I've already got to play. As a player character, I can carry up to 2 guns at one time. Survivors, however, can carry 1 gun between their 2 hands. But if the Survivor is in your party, then you still get that extra gun at your disposal should you need to shoot. There are some gun cards with draw 2 on them, but don't worry about that for now, we'll go into that a bit more later on. Once you've placed your gun card down, you can choose to discard it at any time. So for example, if you've run out of bullets and you can't get it reloaded for whatever reason, it won't cost you any actions to get rid of it. The last card in my hand is a way of making my houses more secure. Barricades are played by placing them inside a barricade slot, with the slot itself covering up the value of the card. You then place the card on the board with the barricade graphic facing the edge and the action card graphic facing the centre of the board. If I hadn't already claimed the house using my Survivor, I would then claim it when I played the barricade. The barricade stops zombies from being able to freely enter that house, but sadly wood and nails does not an impenetrable fortress make. On the back of each barricade card is its value, that's the one covered up by the barricade slot. That represents the number of zombies required to tear that barricade down. Once that many zombies are adjacent to the building, represented by the yellow walls, The barricade can no longer hold and must be taken down, and then gets added to the discard pile. You can, however, fortify buildings with more than one barricade. You do this by simply placing another barricade card from your hand into the barricade slots using one of your actions. You can place up to 3 barricade cards on one slot. When you've got more than one barricade in a slot, you simply add together the value of each barricade to determine how many zombies are required to tear them all down. Another feature you might find on the back of a barricade card is the word trap. This represents some goodies you've left behind for anyone wanting to tear that barricade down. The word trap will be followed by a number which indicates the amount of damage dealt. For example, this barricade card has a trap value of 2. That means that 2 of the zombies adjacent to the building will be blown up should they be able to tear that barricade down. When they're killed, they get added to my zombie total and the barricade card gets discarded. This is the same for any players that try and tear down the barricade as well, with the trap value indicating how much damage that player will take. The final item card that's available, should you have drawn one, is the fireworks card. This represents a way of you distracting the zombies for one turn. You place this next to the house your pawn currently occupies, and until it is your go again, no zombies can move towards that house. This is determined using the line of sight or straight line method. For example, if this zombie were to move here and continue to move in a straight line, that straight line does not go through my house, therefore he can make that move. This zombie, however, if he continued on that straight line, that would go through my house, so he cannot make that move. Once I've finished my 3 actions, the turn rotates around.
I'm going to start my turn by using my free move to go to this other house. Now if I've got no items in my hand that I intend to use, I can use my first action to take an object or item from the stash in the house I've gone to. If this is an item card, I can choose to either put this into my hand, or if it's something I don't intend to keep, I can put it back, either on top or below the pile. If when you decide to search a house, you happen to have a survivor in your party, that means you can draw an additional card when you search. You can then sort through the 2 cards you've just drawn, take one, and put the other back, either on top or underneath that deck. Now each action can be done more than once in a given turn, so I can now look at the stash again. This time I've got what's called an event card. These event cards are identified by the text on the bottom, which tells you something is going on. Now, with the event cards, the instructions on them more or less tell you exactly what you need to do. Those events happen immediately. You can, however, use an action to draw that into your hand in the same way as an item, so that would have taken me 2 actions to draw it and keep it. Think of it as putting a little bit of extra effort into postponing something from happening. This is the +1 action card. This simply means I get +1 action this turn. Now this is a bit of a redundant card if I don't choose to keep it, because it simply means that I get back the action I used to pick up the card in the first place. So I'm going to put this into my hand. Now action cards that you have in your hand can be played for free in later turns. This means that I'd be able to get 4 actions in a later turn, because I can just play this straight off. The only action card, or event card rather, that requires any real explanation is the zombie card. The zombie card simply means that you take a zombie from the graveyard and place it at your current location. You then have to fight that zombie, but we're going to look at combat more later on. If at the end of your turn you find yourself with more than 3 cards in your hand, you must discard back down to 3. If however you've got cards in your hand that you just can't bear to lose, there is another option. You can, as an action, store cards in a house that you control. You'd simply use one of your actions, place them down vertically to differentiate them from the stash in the house. You can put any number of cards from your hand down in this single action. Obviously I don't control this house at the moment, so I wouldn't normally be allowed to do this. You can then later choose to pick up those cards, again picking all of them up for one action. If you lose control of the house, however, then those stored cards that you've placed in there get turned sideways and placed at the bottom of the pile of the stash that's in there. If there isn't currently a stash in that house because it's been depleted, simply turn them sideways. If you should find yourself in a house that's got some special text on it, then that means you've got an opportunity to use a special ability as one of your actions that turn. Now items such as this nosy neighbour just require you to read the instructions and then slide the card under the board to indicate you've used one of its charges. Now in the case of the nosy neighbour, if I controlled this building, it would give me the ability to move my pawn to another building of the same type. Now I would only need to control the building that I'm using the action for and not the one I'm sending him to. Once I'd done the action, I would slide the card under the table so it's now showing 4 rather than 5. The abilities of the other special houses are written on them in full, and they're fairly self-explanatory. Now that's my turn over, so it moves on to the next person. I'm feeling a little bit vindictive. I could opt instead to try and steal a house off one of these guys. I simply move my pawn over to Josh's house, and I can use one action to tear down his barricade. That means that that house is now undefended. Alternatively, I can try and be a bit clever. I can play my own barricade onto the one he's already built. This means that I now steal that house off him, so it belongs to me. This also means that the unarmed survivor that he previously played in that house has to be discarded. The next action is for if you're a bit of a fan of hit and run attacks, or you might be in a bit of hot water and need to get out quick. You can spend 1 action point to move another 3 squares in the same way as you did in the free movement before. Now, Paul mentioned a few restrictions on this. These are quite simple. You can't move into a house owned by another player that's got 3 barricades, unless you first spend an action tearing one of them down. You can never move into the cemetery for any reason, and you can also not move through or even into a square occupied by a zombie unless you've got at least enough bullets to have a go at killing it. Once I've done all my actions and the last person has had their turn, the keeper of the time turns on the turn counter by 1. So let's recap what you do each turn. You have the option to do 1 free move and 3 turn actions. Firstly, the free move can be done before or after your 3 actions. You can move 3 squares in any direction. You may not move into an enemy house that's got 3 barricades. You can't move through a square occupied by a zombie unless you've got enough bullets to shoot it. Your 3 turn actions can be any one of the following. Play a non-event card from your hand, draw a card from your current location, store a card in your current location if you control it, shoot your gun, tear down an enemy barricade, use a house special ability, transfer a survivor from your party to a house or vice versa, take a weapon from a survivor and place it under your character card or vice versa, move 3 squares using the same restrictions as for the free move. So far we've been playing the game fairly peacefully. But remember, we are actually all armed to the teeth. If in your turn you find yourself near a zombie, you can choose as an action to take a shot at it. Simply turn over the top card of the combat card deck once you've nominated the zombie you're shooting at. If the number on the card is equal to or higher than the distance between you and the zombie, you've killed it. You take that zombie and you can keep it because that's worth points at the end. If, however, the card you turn over has got a number lower than the distance or has got the word jammed on it, that means that you've failed to kill the zombie. You can choose at that point to take another shot without incurring an additional action. This is kind of because it's actually aiming that requires the action, and once you've got the zombie in your sights, you can squeeze off as many rounds as you would like. Each time you take a shot, you must rotate your gun so that the number facing away from you is 1 lower. This is to indicate that you've spent a round from your gun. You can choose to use a second gun, but that requires then a second action, regardless of whether it's a gun that you hold or one held by a survivor in your party. It also takes a second action if you choose to shoot at a different zombie or another player. Once you've run out of bullets, you can't fire anymore.
Combat is not limited to zombies. If you find yourself on the same square as another player and you want to exact some revenge, you can choose to initiate combat for an action. When doing so, assuming each player has enough bullets, they will draw 1 combat card. John? With the highest value combat card drawn being the winner.
Woohoo!
As the attacker, if you happen to draw the jam card, you can choose to draw another combat card instead. Here I've drawn the 2 squares away card, meaning I've now won the combat. When you lose combat, you take 1 point of damage. So you take your player character card and turn it around 1 so that the number facing away from you is 1 less. Alternatively, if you have a survivor in your party with you, you can choose to have them take the damage instead of you. Human shield. When you fired a bullet from your gun, you need to make note of that by rotating the gun card around so that the number on the card facing away from you is again 1 less, to represent the bullet you've just used. It's important to note that when you draw a second combat card, because the first one you drew was jammed, it takes another bullet. So be sure to turn your gun card around one more so that the bullet value is one lower. After the combat has been resolved, each player has the option of retreating one square. Had the defending player been unarmed, then the attacker player still draws one combat card, but the defending player draws nothing and is assumed to have taken the damage automatically and retreats 3 squares.
It may be the case that during another player's turn they move through a square which you occupy. They may have no intention to shoot you, but that doesn't mean they get away scot-free. The defender can choose to initiate combat. This doesn't take away one of the actions of the player whose turn it is. The combat is resolved in exactly the same way as described previously by Josh. It's important to note that any survivors you control can defend in exactly the same way, and the combat rules are resolved exactly as though that survivor were a player. If you've got a gun that says draw 2 on it, this is something a little bit special. It may only have 2 bullets in it, but it means that each time you fire a shot, you get to draw 2 cards from the combat deck. It's then up to you which of these 2 you use. This will, I imagine, normally be the highest one. In this case, I'll get 2 rather than a jammed. Combat can be initiated by using an action during your turn, firing at a player who has entered your square, automatically when a zombie enters a square occupied by a player or an armed survivor. When fighting a zombie, you draw a card and reduce the number of bullets you've got by 1. If a zombie is within the number of squares shown on the card, you've killed it. If the zombie is further away, you fail to kill it but may take additional shots for more bullets. If you fail to kill a zombie on the same square, you take 1 damage and must retreat 3 squares. When fighting a player, both players draw a combat card and reduce the number of bullets by 1. The player with the highest score wins the combat. The losing player must lose 1 health point. If the attacking player draws a jammed card, they may redraw, but it costs them an additional bullet. At the end of each round, each player may choose to retreat 1 square. If the defending player is unarmed, he automatically takes 1 damage and must retreat 3 squares. You may have noticed that as we've each been finishing our turn, we've been moving a zombie. This is because this is the last action you take during your turn. Once you've finished your last character action, you must move a number of zombies equal to the turn number. This means that as this is the end of the second turn for Josh, he's just moved 2 zombies. Now these can be moved in any direction you like, provided that they do not move towards the graveyard. This means they can be moved forward, sideways, or even diagonally, but in no way that reduces the number of squares between them and the graveyard. You're more than likely going to move your zombies towards your other players' houses. This puts them in danger while you go off and gather points. Now if a zombie successfully makes it into an enemy player house that does not contain either the player themselves or one of their survivors, they lose control of that house and they remove their coloured token. If a zombie enters a square occupied by a player pawn, that means that they are attacked and they must defend themselves. They must draw a combat card in much the same way as before. They successfully kill the zombie if they draw any result other than jammed. Now they can fire as many bullets from as many guns as they like in order to achieve this. However, if they fail to kill the zombie after they've expended all of their bullets, then they take 1 damage and must retreat 3 squares. Once 10 turns have passed, the game is over. All that's left to do now is to lick our wounds and to count our points. You get points for a few different things in this game. Firstly, we'll look at the houses. You get a number of points equal to the charges left on the house. So Josh, for his gun collector, gets 5 points because he hasn't used it. John, however, for his gun collector, only gets 4 points because he's used one of the charges to reload a gun. You also get 1 point for each of the following: each zombie you've killed, each barricade card still standing, each survivor you still have alive, and also each loaded gun in either your possession or possession of one of your survivors. They only get 1 point for each loaded gun, regardless of how many bullets it's got. So if your gun has got 1 bullet left, because you fired 2 shots, you still only get 1 point. If you've got a bullet that you haven't fired at all, which has got 3, also only 1 point. Once they're all tallied up, we find that Josh has got 20, I've got a measly 6, and John has got
32.
That makes John the winner. If you look at the side of the Zombietown box, it does say that the game is for anywhere between 3 and 6 players. However, you can play it with 2. This just requires ever so slightly altered rules. The game is set up in pretty much the same way as for the larger game. However, each player is allocated 2 character cards, 2 guns, and 2 different coloured pawns. When you're choosing your house, you then choose your first house for one pawn and the second house for your other pawn. This is done alternately between the players, starting with the youngest. You also, when you're making your starting hand, get given 12 cards and choose 6 of them. The normal rules do apply for these in that you can't keep event cards in that starting hand of 6. During your turn, you also have a pool that's twice as big. You can do 6 actions and have 2 free movements. These can be allocated between your pawns in any way you like. That means if you did fancy it, you could do all 6 actions and both free movements on one pawn and leave the other completely alone. You've also got a difference in the zombie movement. At the end of each turn, each player moves a number of zombies equal to double the number on the turn counter. In turn 1, you move 2 zombies. In turn 2, you move 4 zombies, and so on. Otherwise, the game mechanics are exactly the same. So that's it for Zombietown. Now, as always, we've found some bits we like about the game and some bits that could be potentially improved upon. The first thing I really like about this game is it's really characterful. The thematic elements of the game really do start to make you feel like you're in that zombie survival and can make for some quite interesting and quite exciting moments. The other thing is the game starts quite slow but builds to a crescendo at the end. Mostly because of the way that the zombie movement will cause the game to speed up and become more urgent as more and more zombies pour out the graveyard. You'll also notice that as the ammo starts to become short, you'll start to become a little bit more frantic. The competitive element of the game really is good fun as well, as once you start to spot what your enemies are planning to do to gain those last minute points, you can try and jam a zombie in the way. And one of the things Josh really liked about this was that it's quite tactile. Now, most of the games we've looked at previously have been pretty much just cards. This has got a lot of elements that you can play with, and let's face it, we're boys and we quite like toys. There are a couple of things that, as a group, we have found didn't really suit us. The first thing was that the rules in the book are very ambiguous, and it took us a good few read-throughs and arguments to actually figure out what we were supposed to be doing. Luckily, you've got us for that. The other thing, and this applies to any game that's got permanent character death, and this is something I personally don't like, is that if this happens to you earlier on, because of either a bit of bad luck or somebody ganging up on you, this can mean that you're left out and possibly feeling a little bit bored. Some people, however, in our group did like this because it adds a sense of tension and urgency to the game. Another thing is it can be quite a long game, and the 10-turn limit can mean that you end up repeating the same or similar actions over and again. This can, in some instances, make the game feel a little bit repetitive. The final thing is that the game does come with it a reasonable amount of setup time, certainly compared to any of the games we've looked at before, which have been more or less card games. This will, granted, be nothing compared to certain other games out there and likely the ones that we'll cover in future. That's it for this episode of Skip the Rules. If you found this video useful, please hit like. If you want to hear more from Skip the Rules, please hit subscribe. You can also find out more about us by visiting our website in the link below, or by following us on Facebook or Twitter. You can also, if you've got any questions, email us at questions@skiptherules.co.uk. We'll try and address these questions then in one of our unboxed episodes. Join us next time on Skip the Rules for your chance to jump into that brand new board game without having to do any of that tedious rule reading. See you later. Oh no! Oh no!
D 2.1, take 1. Stop being mean to Paul, Josh. I'm crying.
So let's see what your attic holds. Okay, it's alright, it's good.
Meanwhile.
I'm done.
Do we go like this on The Walking Dead?
When you finish setting up so I can get to the table.
There you go, Paul. There you
And rest.
go. Breathe in through the nose and out.
It wasn't even funny.